Have you ever met someone who seemed perfectly normal on the surface, but left you feeling completely drained after every interaction? Someone who could twist reality so subtly that you began questioning your own memory and perception. Carl Jung spent his career studying the hidden forces that drive human behavior, and what he discovered about certain personality patterns will shock you. Jung realized that the most dangerous people aren't the obvious villains. They're the ones operating from unconscious psychological patterns that turn them into emotional predators without them even knowing it. These individuals don't set out to harm others, but their unresolved psychological wounds create a gravitational pull that can destroy the mental health of everyone around them. Today we're going to examine 6 toxic personality types that Jung identified through his decades of clinical work. These aren't clinical diagnoses. They're psychological patterns that emerge when people refuse to face their own darkness. And here's the disturbing part. Any one of us could become one of these types if we stop doing the hard work of self-awareness. Jung believed that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So as we explore these patterns, ask yourself, which of these shadows might be lurking in your own psyche? Type 1. The Psychological Parasite. Jung encountered patients who seemed to feed off the emotional energy of others like psychic vampires. These individuals had learned to survive by attaching themselves to stronger personalities and slowly draining their life force. They don't do this consciously. It's an unconscious survival strategy developed in childhood when they learned that being helpless was the only way to get attention and care. The psychological parasite presents as helpless, fragile, always in crisis. They have an uncanny ability to make you feel like you're the only person who can save them. They'll share traumatic stories that pull at your heartstrings, create emergencies that require your immediate attention, and make you feel guilty for having boundaries or prioritizing your own needs. These individuals often have what Jung called an undeveloped ego. They never learn to self-soothe, solve problems independently, or regulate their own emotions. Instead, they discovered that appearing vulnerable and needy could get others to take care of them. Over time, this becomes their primary survival strategy. Jung observed that these individuals never develop their own psychological strength because they've learned to outsource their emotional regulation to others. They become expert at finding empathetic people and slowly making themselves indispensable through manufactured dependency. They'll often target caregivers, healers, and naturally nurturing personalities who feel compelled to help. The insidious nature of this pattern is how it escalates gradually. It starts with small requests for support, then grows into constant emotional crises that demand immediate attention. Before you know it, your entire life revolves around managing their emotional state while your own needs are completely neglected. What makes them particularly dangerous is their talent for emotional manipulation disguised as vulnerability. They'll threaten self-harm if you try to leave, guilt you for abandoning them when you need space, and gradually isolate you from other relationships by consuming all your emotional energy. They become masters at playing the victim while actually being the predator. Jung noted that these parasitic relationships prevent both people from achieving individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated person. The parasite never learns to stand alone and develop their own strength, while their host never learns to maintain healthy boundaries and self-care. It becomes a toxic symbiosis that stunts both parties' psychological growth. The ancient Stoic Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much trouble he avoids, who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does." The psychological parasite forces you to become obsessed with their emotional state, constantly monitoring their mood and needs, trapping you in a codependent cycle that serves no one's highest good. Type 2. The Reality Distorter. Perhaps the most insidious type Jung encountered was the individual who had mastered the art of gaslighting before the term even existed. These people have such a fragmented relationship with truth that they genuinely believe their distorted version of reality, making them incredibly convincing when they deny facts or rewrite history. Jung called this active imagination gone wrong. Instead of using creative visualization for psychological growth, these individuals unconsciously reshape memories and facts to protect their ego from uncomfortable truths. They don't set out to lie deliberately. They've learned to edit reality in real time to maintain their self-image and avoid psychological pain. The reality distorter will make you question your own memory, perception, and sanity. They'll deny conversations that happened yesterday, claim they said things they never said, and rewrite history to cast themselves as either the victim or the hero in every scenario. When confronted with evidence of their behavior, they'll insist you're remembering it wrong or being too sensitive. Jung observed through his clinical work that these individuals typically have what he called a weak ego structure. Their sense of self is so fragile that admitting to any mistake, fault, or negative behavior would cause a complete psychological collapse. So instead of facing reality, they unconsciously alter their perception of events to maintain their internal narrative of being good, right, and blameless. This pattern often develops in childhood when a person learns that acknowledging mistakes leads to severe punishment, abandonment, or shame. As a defense mechanism, they begin unconsciously editing their memories and perceptions to avoid these painful consequences. By adulthood, this reality editing has become so automatic they're often unaware they're doing it. What makes them particularly dangerous is their ability to project absolute confidence in their false version of events. They'll look you directly in the eye and deny something you witnessed them do just hours before. They'll swear on everything they hold sacred that black is white, and their conviction is so complete that you begin to doubt your own senses. Over time, this constant reality distortion can drive their victims to genuine psychological breakdown. You start questioning your own memory, your perception, even your sanity. You develop anxiety and depression from the cognitive dissonance of knowing something is true while being told repeatedly that it isn't. Jung understood that truth and psychological health are intimately connected. When someone forces you to live in a distorted reality, it damages your relationship with your own inner knowing. You lose trust in yourself, which is one of the most devastating psychological injuries a person can sustain. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. The reality distorter forces you to constantly react to false narratives and manufactured crises, keeping you trapped in a maze of confusion and self-doubt where healthy reactions become impossible. Type 3. The emotional terrorist. Jung identified individuals who had weaponized their emotions to control others through fear and intimidation. Unlike obvious bullies who use physical force, emotional terrorists use their feelings as tools of manipulation, making their targets feel responsible for managing their emotional outbursts and walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the next explosion. These individuals have learned that extreme emotional reactions get them what they want. They'll fly into screaming rages over minor inconveniences, threaten suicide when criticized, or collapse into sobbing fits when they don't get their way. The key characteristic is that these reactions are wildly disproportionate to the triggering event. A small request becomes a personal attack. A gentle suggestion becomes devastating criticism. Jung understood through his therapeutic work that this pattern often develops from childhood trauma, where the individual learned that extreme emotions were the only way to get attention, avoid abandonment, or feel some sense of control in chaotic circumstances. As adults, they continue using these tactics unconsciously, genuinely believing their responses are justified and that others are responsible for making them feel this way. The emotional terrorist keeps everyone around them walking on eggshells. Family members, Friends and colleagues learn to avoid certain topics, suppress their own needs, and constantly monitor the terrorist's mood to prevent the next explosion. Conversations become minefields where any wrong word could trigger a devastating emotional detonation. What makes this pattern particularly insidious is how the terrorist often positions themselves as the victim after their outbursts. They'll claim others made them react that way, refuse to take responsibility for their behavior, and demand comfort and reassurance instead of accountability. They become masters at reversing the victim-perpetrator dynamic, making those they've terrorized feel guilty for causing the episode. Jung noted that these individuals are trapped in what he called emotional inflation. They become so identified with their feelings that they lose the ability to observe their own behavior objectively. Their emotions become their entire identity, making genuine relationship impossible because every interaction becomes about managing their emotional state rather than authentic connection. The terrorists' emotions serve as both weapon and shield. They use them to attack others and then hide behind them to avoid consequences. They'll claim they can't help their reactions, that they're just emotional people, or that others are too sensitive if they object to being emotionally brutalized. Living with an emotional terrorist creates a trauma bond where victims become hypervigilant, anxious, and focused entirely on the terrorist's emotional needs while completely neglecting their own. The unpredictability of the attacks creates a state of chronic stress that can lead to serious physical and mental health problems for those trapped in these relationships. Type 4, the Superiority Complex. Jung encountered many patients who had developed an inflated sense of self-importance to compensate for deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. These individuals present as arrogant, condescending, and dismissive of others, but their superiority is actually a psychological defense mechanism protecting a wounded ego that cannot tolerate being seen as ordinary or flawed. The superiority complex manifests as constant criticism of others, intellectual intimidation, and an inability to admit ignorance or mistakes. These individuals need to be the smartest person in every room, the expert on every topic, and the final authority on all decisions. They cannot tolerate being wrong, learning from others, or being in situations where their expertise is questioned. Jung observed through his clinical practice that this pattern often develops in childhood when a person's sense of worth becomes pathologically attached to being special, gifted, or better than others. Perhaps they were the smart kid in their family, or they received attention only when they achieved something impressive. They learn that their value as a human being depends on maintaining their superior position, so they unconsciously sabotage others to maintain their elevated status. These individuals become addicted to what Jung called ego inflation. They derive their entire sense of self from being above others rather than from genuine self-worth. This creates a psychological house of cards that must be constantly defended because any threat to their superiority threatens their entire identity. What makes them particularly toxic in relationships is their compulsive need to make others feel small and incompetent. They'll dismiss your ideas before you've finished expressing them, correct your grammar in the middle of emotional conversations, interrupt your stories to tell better ones, and generally ensure that every interaction reinforces their dominance and your inferiority. The superiority complex individual cannot tolerate others succeeding, learning, or growing because it threatens their position as the special one. They'll subtly undermine your confidence, question your decisions, and point out your flaws while presenting themselves as the voice of wisdom and experience. Jung noted that these individuals are actually in constant terror of being found out as frauds or average people. Their entire identity depends on maintaining their superior image, so any threat to their expertise triggers intense anxiety and aggressive defensiveness. They live in perpetual fear that someone will discover they don't actually know as much as they pretend to. This pattern is particularly destructive in family systems where the superiority complex parent crushes their children's natural curiosity and confidence, or in workplace environments where these individuals create toxic hierarchies based on intellectual intimidation rather than genuine competence. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche observed that the individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. The superiority complex individual overwhelms others psychologically to avoid being overwhelmed themselves, creating a prison of loneliness disguised as dominance. Type 5. The chaos creator. Jung identified individuals who seemed to unconsciously create drama and conflict wherever they went. These people are addicted to emotional intensity and cannot tolerate peace, stability, or calm. They'll manufacture crises, start arguments, and create problems seemingly out of thin air just to generate the emotional stimulation they compulsively crave. The chaos creator often presents initially as exciting and passionate, drawing others in with their dramatic energy and apparent depth of feeling. They seem to live life more intensely than others, experiencing higher highs and lower lows. But over time, their need for constant emotional stimulation becomes absolutely exhausting for everyone around them. Jung understood through his clinical observations that this pattern often develops from childhood trauma, where chaos, drama, and emotional intensity were the norm. These individuals never learn to tolerate peace and quiet. It actually feels threatening and wrong to them. Calm environments trigger anxiety because their nervous system has become addicted to stress hormones and high-intensity situations. They cannot let sleeping dogs lie. They'll always poke at old wounds, bring up settled grievances, and stir up issues that everyone else has moved past. They have an uncanny ability to find the one sensitive topic that will create maximum emotional reaction in any group setting. What makes them particularly dangerous is their ability to destabilize previously healthy environments. They'll introduce conflict into harmonious friend groups, create jealousy between romantic partners, start office politics in peaceful workplaces, and generally ensure that drama follows them wherever they go, like a destructive wake. The chaos creator becomes a master at reading people's insecurities and pushing exactly the right buttons to create maximum emotional reaction. They'll bring up your ex at family dinner, mention your weight when you're feeling vulnerable, or share information that was told to them in confidence, always with the excuse that they're just being honest or keeping things real. Jung noted that these individuals are trapped in what he called chronic activation. They've become physiologically addicted to stress hormones and cannot function without crisis. Their nervous system has adapted to chaos, making peace feel like depression, emptiness, or death. They literally need drama to feel alive. The chaos creator often justifies their destructive behavior as honesty, authenticity, or keeping things interesting. They'll claim they're just addressing problems that others are afraid to face. But in reality, they're manufacturing problems that wouldn't exist without their interference. They become emotional arsonists, setting fires just to watch them burn. Living with a chaos creator means never being able to relax, never feeling truly safe, and constantly being on guard for the next manufactured crisis. They make peaceful resolution of conflicts impossible because they have an unconscious investment in keeping things stirred up. Type 6. The identity thief. Perhaps the most subtle toxic type Jung observed was the individual who lacked a stable sense of self and compensated by unconsciously copying and stealing the identities of others. These people are like psychological chameleons, constantly shifting their personality, interests, and even their history to match whoever they're with or whoever they admire. The identity thief doesn't have malicious intent in the traditional sense. They're desperately trying to figure out who they are by trying on different personalities like clothing. But this creates profound confusion and discomfort in their relationships because no one knows which version of them is real, authentic, or will show up tomorrow. Jung called this persona inflation, taken to its extreme, when someone becomes so identified with their various social masks that they completely lose touch with their authentic self. They become a collection of borrowed traits, stolen stories, and copied behaviors, rather than a genuine individual with their own unique essence. What makes them particularly toxic is their tendency to mirror your personality back to you in distorted and unsettling ways. They'll suddenly develop your exact same interests after spending time with you, begin using your unique phrases and expressions, copy your style of dress, and even steal your personal stories and present them as their own experiences to other people. The identity thief often forms intense, obsessive friendships or relationships where they study their target like a research project. They'll interrogate you about your thoughts, feelings, childhood experiences, and dreams, not out of genuine interest in knowing you, but to gather raw material for their own personality construction. Jung observed through his clinical work that these individuals create profound psychological unease in others because interacting with them feels like looking into a funhouse mirror. Everything is familiar, but somehow wrong, distorted, or hollow. Their lack of authentic selfhood creates a psychological vacuum that disturbs our own sense of identity and reality. The identity thief will often become obsessed with people who have strong, distinctive personalities, successful careers, or interesting life stories. They'll insert themselves into these people's lives with intense admiration and flattery, only to gradually begin copying and stealing elements of their identity. What makes this pattern particularly damaging is how it violates the fundamental boundaries of selfhood. When someone steals your stories, your personality traits, your unique expressions, they're essentially stealing pieces of your soul. It creates a strange sense of violation that's difficult to articulate or defend against. Jung understood that healthy identity formation requires what he called individuation, the process of becoming authentically yourself rather than a copy of others. The identity thief has arrested their development at an earlier stage where they believe they must become someone else to be worthy of love and acceptance. The most disturbing aspect of this pattern is how the identity thief will often discard your borrowed identity once they've extracted what they wanted from it, moving on to copy someone new while leaving you feeling strangely depleted and confused about what just happened to your sense of self. Breaking free from toxic patterns. Jung's most powerful insight was that these toxic patterns exist within all of us as potential shadows. The difference between healthy and toxic individuals is awareness and choice. When we remain unconscious of our shadows, they control us. When we face them honestly, we can integrate them constructively. The process Jung called individuation requires us to recognize our own capacity for toxicity and choose a different path. This means developing genuine self-awareness, taking responsibility for our psychological patterns, and doing the hard work of healing our wounds instead of inflicting them on others. Jung believed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. But this transformation can only be positive when both people are committed to conscious growth rather than unconscious repetition of toxic patterns. If you recognize yourself in any of these types, don't despair. Recognition is the first step toward change. Jung taught that we all have the capacity for psychological growth throughout our lives, but only if we're willing to face the uncomfortable truth about our own shadows. The goal isn't perfection, it's consciousness. When we become aware of our toxic patterns, we can catch ourselves before we harm others and choose healthier responses. This is the difference between being driven by unconscious forces and living as a conscious, integrated human being. Which of these patterns have you encountered in others? More importantly, which ones do you recognize in yourself? Share your insights in the comments. Sometimes the courage to name our shadows is what sets us free. If this exploration of Jung's insights resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden dynamics of human psychology. Remember, the most dangerous person is the one who refuses to look in the mirror. The most powerful person is the one who does the work to transform what they see there.